Hello and welcome to the Singapore Sessions, a series about what Canada can learn from the Lion City. I'm your host, Emma Cochrane, and today we're talking identity as infrastructure. So I wanted to start with a framework for identity that I found in one of the Center for Strategic Futures publications, and they basically identify 3 different levels of identity that they say can either be aligned or in conflict. The big level is your state-ascribed identity. So this is kind of like the demographic bucket that you fit into. And in Singapore, that's actually pretty closely tied to their planning and policy, because whether you can access government-subsidized housing is based on your age, marital status, your ethnicity, and then also things like the second language that you learn in school has traditionally been based on the ethnicity of your parents. I think that's going to shift a little bit because they're seeing a rise in interracial, intercultural marriages, and so people don't fall so neatly into the same categories. But for now, your state-ascribed identity is really intertwined with Singaporean policy. The second level is your society-ascribed identity, so that's sort of like the groups that you fit into or don't, the social labels that are assigned to you by other people. It could be sort of associated with your job, but the same publication noted that with the rise of AI and the gig economy, maybe your job doesn't define your social identity so much, but it's that sort of mid-level of how other people see you. And then the third level is your personal internal identity. And what I experienced when I was there, I don't know if it was just the places that we were or if you can generalize a little bit, but it seemed like that was less overt in Singapore. In North America, we really prioritize individualism, individual self-expression. We celebrate those who stand out. And I felt like in Singapore, it was more about social cohesion and being Singaporean than expressing your own individual identity. And it was kind of funny, on the day we left, there was a Lady Gaga show that night, famously an advocate for expressing your authentic identity. And I felt like you could kind of see a shift in the clothing, in the attitudes of the people that we encountered in the more touristy areas as the concert goers started to arrive in the city. And then I think it's important to add a 4th level here, and that is national identity. So what does it mean to be Singaporean? What does it mean to be Canadian? Because Singapore is so young, there has been a lot of dedicated effort over the past 60 years focused on establishing that shared national identity. They self-describe as having a unique brand of political entrepreneurship that is part of the national identity, and I think that fits. It is a country that tries to do governance in a new way, incorporating more futures work, being very adaptable and open. They talk about their shared values as being about fair competition, reward for hard work, yearning for progress. And I felt like we could sense that, perhaps not a yearning for progress, but a belief in the people we spoke to in ongoing evolution and adaptation and a very future-focused society. They've also worked hard to cultivate a strong identity as a tourist destination, big investments in the area around Marina Bay, the Marina Bay Sands, hotel, casino, shopping complex. They've invested in the airport, made it one of the best airports in the world, and so this identity of being a destination, of being a hub, not only for tourism, but a hub of trade, of aviation, of finance, that's kind of built into their sense of self as a nation. But I also got the sense that for a long time, part of their identity has been about being small, and that they don't want it to be anymore, that there's a desire now to more boldly express their identity as being a global leader. There's been a lot of work also done by the Singapore government on how to connect their citizens to the nation. The theme of the 2017 Foresight Conference was about identities and aspirations and the role of the state in sort of managing those. So we've talked previously about the role that homeownership plays in creating a connection to nation and a sense of having a stake in its future. They have mandatory military service for young men so that they're trying to build kind of a culture of serving Singapore. We saw PSAs in the transit stations about how national unity is the best defense against terrorism, so really trying to reinforce that. And then we also heard about programs where you can have your tuition paid for at international universities as long as you commit to coming back and working for the government for 5 years after graduation. So I think this topic is really interesting in a moment where Canada has been facing threats of annexation from Donald Trump, and that has sparked in some a renewed sense of nationalism and national pride.
You don't see me in the hats too much, but this is about everyday Canadians standing up for their country.
And in others, at least, a contemplation of what it means to be Canadian today, why we should continue to exist as a sovereign nation outside the United States. And we're kind of confronting these issues of a shared sense of national identity in a way that we haven't over the past decade or so. During our discussions as a class, one of my classmates used the phrase something like, nationalism is cringy, which I think is a good summary of how many Canadians and North Americans feel, because nationalism, flag waving, has become kind of tied up with this anti-progressive, anti-immigration, protectionist kind of sensibility, which many people are not aligned with. And that is something that we have to still figure out how to reconcile, because there is a trade-off in Singapore. They've made a lot of progress in terms of urban design, urban development. Most of their population owns a home. They're doing great work in sustainability. They're doing interesting work in futures and foresight. And there's a lot that's good about their national identity and the nation. But if you look at global freedom indexes, they're described as only partially free. If that internal identity is aligned with the national standard, then you can have a great life. If it's in conflict and you're someone who your marriage isn't recognized by the government and therefore you can't access housing, it's a lot harder to be different there. And so when we think of this idea of social cohesion and having a shared national identity, there's also always this question of, when we define what it means to be Canadian, who are we effectively leaving out by establishing that definition? One of the things that I read over the past 6 months that stood out to me was a column about how national identity is not something that you have or something that you are. It's something that you build. It's an active thing. It's something that shifts over time, and that we have the power as citizens of Canada today to decide what being Canadian means. And I think that's something that Singapore can teach us here, in the sense that there is value in creating that shared identity, having clarity about what we want to be as a nation and taking steps to get there. That's not something that we need to hand over to a centralized government to decide. We can all take steps to shape that. So that's where I'm going to leave us, with a call to go out and shape the kind of country we want to live in. Thank you so much for listening to the Singapore Sessions.